the morning it happens. You are not watching this because you think war is coming. You are watching this because some part of you already knows it might. Here is what that morning actually looks like. It is 6:47 a.m. Your alarm goes off. You reach for your phone the same as every other day, but this time the notification that loads first is not a news headline. It is not a stock alert. It is a text from your brother or your mother or your closest friend, and all it says is, "Have you seen the news?" You have not. You open it. And in the next 90 seconds, the world you understood yesterday stops existing. Three things happened simultaneously that morning, and military analysts have wargamed this scenario hundreds of times. A naval confrontation in the South China Sea escalates past the point of diplomatic retrieval. A cyber attack disables the power grid across a NATO member state. And a government, somewhere, decides that history will later record the moment everything changed. Your first instinct will be to call someone. Your second task will be to check flights. By the time most people reach that second instinct, the airports are already closed. This is not a documentary about whether World War III will happen. That debate belongs to politicians and television anchors who have never read an actual war games report. This is a documentary about one specific, brutal, and deeply practical question that the world's wealthiest survivalists, most decorated military strategists, and most quietly prepared governments have already answered for themselves. Where do you want to be standing when it begins? Not the country your passport is from, not the city where your job is, not the place your family has lived for 3 generations. Where does the data say you survive? Because here's the truth that no geography channel, no news network, and no government will tell you directly. The answer to that question is not random. It is not luck. It is not fate. It is geography. It is a strategy. It is history. And by the time this documentary ends, you will understand it with a clarity that most people on this planet will never have, including, almost certainly, the people living in the places they are most convinced are safe. The lie you were sold about safety. Let us start with the single most dangerous idea that modern civilization has normalized. That distance from conflict equals safety. It sounds logical. It feels logical. And for most of the 20th century, it was at least partially true. If you lived in New Zealand during World War II, you were not bombed. If you lived in Argentina during the Cold War, you did not face nuclear incineration. Geography for most of human history was the original fortress wall, but that wall has been quietly demolished, and almost nobody talked about it while it was happening. In 2007, Russia demonstrated it could disable the digital infrastructure of an entire nation, Estonia, without firing a single bullet. Banks stopped. Government systems collapsed. Emergency services went dark. Estonia is a small country, but the lesson was enormous. War had found a door that bypassed every geographic advantage simultaneously. In 2020, a global pandemic, not a weapon, not a war, but a single biological disruption exposed with surgical precision exactly which nations were genuinely self-sufficient and which ones were one supply chain failure away from chaos. The nations that suffered most were not the poorest. They were the most dependent, the most connected, the most integrated into a global system. The moment it stuttered, revealed itself to be a house of cards built on the assumption that nothing would ever go seriously wrong. Now multiply that disruption by a factor of 100. That is what a third world war does to global supply chains. It does not just disrupt them, it severs them, deliberately, strategically. Because cutting your enemy's supply lines is not a side effect of modern warfare. It is one of its primary objectives. So when you ask where you want to be when it begins, you are not just asking about bombs and missiles. You are asking, where can a human being survive when the entire system that delivers food to your grocery store, fuel to your car, medicine to your hospital, and electricity to your home stops working, possibly for years? That question has a very different answer than most people expect. What the billionaires already know. There is a data point that receives almost no mainstream attention, yet it is one of the most revealing signals in modern geopolitical behavior. Since 2016, the rate at which ultra-high net worth individuals with assets exceeding $50 million have acquired second residencies, remote properties, and what the real estate industry quietly calls legacy retreats has increased by over 300%. These are not vacation homes. The properties being purchased share a specific and consistent profile. They are located in the southern hemisphere. They have access to fresh water from natural sources, rivers, aquifers, and rainfall that does not depend on municipal infrastructure. They have arable land capable of food production. They are not near major cities. They are not near military installations. And they are not in nations that have binding military alliances with great powers. New Zealand's South Island has seen foreign property acquisition at levels that prompted the government to legally restrict it. The Azores, a remote Portuguese archipelago sitting alone in the North Atlantic, has seen a surge of investment from European technology executives that local economists cannot explain through normal market logic. Patagonia, at the southern tip of South America, has quietly become one of the most sought-after locations for what buyers describe, without elaboration, as long-term planning. These people are not conspiracy theorists. They are not doomsday preppers building underground bunkers and stockpiling canned goods. They are the individuals with access to the most sophisticated risk analysis on the planet. They employ former intelligence officers, retired military strategists, and geopolitical risk consultants whose entire professional function is to answer exactly the question this documentary is asking. And they have answered it with their own money, their own families, and their own futures by moving them to specific places on this earth. The question is, why those places? And what do those places have in common? The 5 variables that actually determine survival. Military strategists and conflict geographers use a framework that rarely appears in popular media. It breaks survivability down into 5 independent variables, and the key insight is that a location must score well on all 5 simultaneously. Excellence in one cannot compensate for failure in another. Variable 1, geographic isolation. Not just distance, but genuine physical separation from the theaters where conflict is most likely to be fought. This means ocean barriers, mountain ranges, or vast uninhabited terrain that make military logistics prohibitively costly. The South Pacific offers this. Certain parts of South America offer this. Much of sub-Saharan Africa, paradoxically, does not because its resources make it a target for proxy conflict. Variable 2, political neutrality with historical precedent. This is where most people make a critical mistake. They confuse current political stability with genuine neutrality. These are not the same thing. Switzerland has maintained neutrality through 2 world wars and every major European conflict for over 200 years. Not because it was lucky, but because neutrality is engineered into its political DNA, its military doctrine, its foreign policy, and its physical infrastructure. It has bunker capacity for its entire population. Its mountain terrain makes conventional invasion catastrophically expensive, and every major European power has for centuries found it more useful as a neutral financial and diplomatic intermediary than as a conquered territory. That is real neutrality. It has receipts. Compare that to a nation that is currently peaceful but hosts American military bases, or has signed a mutual defense treaty in the last decade, or sits on resources that a major power considers strategically essential. That nation is not neutral. It is simply not yet relevant to the conflict. The moment the conflict expands, that changes. Variable 3, food sovereignty. The ability to feed a population entirely from within its own borders without imports. This variable is increasingly rare. Japan imports approximately 60% of its calories. The United Kingdom imports roughly 45%. Singapore, as mentioned, imports nearly everything. Nations with genuine food sovereignty in the context of their own population size include New Zealand, Uruguay, Iceland, and, perhaps surprisingly, Paraguay. These are not the world's most glamorous destinations, but glamour is a peacetime luxury. Variable 4, energy independence. Access to domestic energy that does not depend on global supply chains or pipelines that cross contested territory. Iceland generates virtually all of its electricity from geothermal and hydroelectric sources. Norway is energy-rich beyond any reasonable domestic need. New Zealand has significant renewable energy capacity. Nations dependent on imported oil, imported gas, or nuclear fuel from foreign suppliers face potential energy collapse in a prolonged global conflict, regardless of how far they are from the front lines. Variable 5, institutional resilience. This is the variable that is hardest to quantify and most often overlooked, yet historical evidence suggests it may be the most important of all. Nations with strong, trusted institutions where citizens broadly cooperate with governance structures, even under stress, maintain social cohesion under wartime conditions. Nations with deep political polarization, eroded institutional trust, or histories of internal conflict tend to fracture precisely when external pressure arrives. The danger of social collapse is not dramatic. It is quiet. It is supply hoarding. It is a breakdown of law enforcement. It is the slow erosion of cooperation that makes any organized response to food shortage, to disease, to infrastructure failure impossible to execute. The nations that survived the 20th century's worst disruptions with their societies intact were almost universally the ones where people, despite hardship, continued to trust each other enough to function collectively. Places the data points to, and why. When all five variables are applied simultaneously, a small number of locations emerge with consistent results across multiple independent analyses. New Zealand is the location that appears most frequently, and not by coincidence. It sits at the geographic edge of the world, separated from every major conflict theater by thousands of miles of open ocean. It has no strategic resources that make it a military target. It has no binding offensive military commitments. It produces food at roughly 10 times the consumption capacity of its population. Its water is abundant and clean. Its institutions are among the most trusted in the world by their own citizens. And its southern hemisphere position means that even atmospheric fallout from a northern hemisphere nuclear exchange arrives, diminished, delayed, and more manageable. The one vulnerability, its close relationship with the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, connects it to American strategic interests in ways that introduce non-zero risk. This is why some analysts rate the southern South Island remote, agricultural, and functionally disconnected from any military infrastructure as more valuable than its cities. Iceland presents a compelling case for a different reason. Its entire energy infrastructure runs on geothermal power, a domestic resource that no foreign power can cut off, sanction, or disrupt. Its fishing industry provides reliable protein for a population that is among the smallest of any independent nation. Its North Atlantic position, while geographically close to conflict-prone Europe, has historically been overlooked in actual conflict because it offers little strategic value to any attacking force. Switzerland operates on a model that deserves its own analysis because it does not rely on isolation. It relies on preparation. Every building constructed in Switzerland after 1963 was legally required to include a nuclear shelter. The nation has over 360,000 documented shelter spaces, representing coverage for more than its entire population. Its military doctrine is explicitly defensive, designed to make an invasion so costly that no rational aggressor would attempt it. And its political neutrality is not a posture. It is a constitutional commitment that has survived every pressure, every war, and every alliance shift of the last 2 centuries. Uruguay is the answer that surprises most people, and perhaps that surprises itself the signal. It has no strategic resources of global significance. It has no military alliances. It has a small, well-fed, educated population. Its agricultural output is substantial relative to its size. And it sits in a region, the southern cone of South America, that has been, by every historical measure, the least militarized major landmass on Earth for the past 100 years. It will never appear on a list of glamorous destinations, but this documentary is not about glamour. The places that feel safe, but are not. Understanding where to be requires equal clarity about where not to be, particularly the places whose apparent safety is a function of peacetime conditions that evaporate under genuine conflict stress. The United States, for all its internal resources and geographic scale, is the primary target in any conflict involving Russia, China, or both simultaneously. Its military infrastructure is distributed across its entire continental territory, meaning that a significant portion of its landmass carries target value. Its political polarization represents one of the most significant institutional resilience risks of any developed democracy. And its food distribution system, while agriculturally productive, depends on logistical infrastructure that is deeply vulnerable to cyber disruption. Australia feels remote. It is remote. But Pine Gap, the joint American-Australian intelligence facility in the Northern Territory, places Australia inside the American strategic perimeter in ways that a purely geographic analysis misses entirely. It is a signals intelligence node of critical importance to American missile defense and surveillance operations. In a conflict between the United States and any adversary with long-range strike capability, Pine Gap is a target. Canada presents a similar paradox. Its vast northern wilderness appears untouchable, but NORAD, the Joint North American Aerospace Defense Command, means that Canadian airspace and Canadian military infrastructure are functionally integrated with American defense systems. Canada's major population centers sit within easy range of any strike intended for American targets. Its safety is, in the most direct sense, contingent on American safety. Japan and South Korea require almost no elaboration. They sit at the geographic epicenter of the most dangerous potential conflict theater on Earth. The confrontation between American alliance structures and Chinese and North Korean military ambition. They are wealthy, stable, and extraordinarily well-governed in peacetime. They are also, in the specific scenario this documentary addresses, among the highest risk inhabited landmasses on the planet. The world that comes after, and who survives it. The final variable, the one that matters most and is discussed least, is not survival during a conflict. It is survival through the decade that follows one. History is consistent on this point. The most destructive period of any major war is rarely the war itself. It is the 5 to 10 years afterward when supply chains are broken, when governments are rebuilding, when disease moves through populations weakened by years of stress, and when the social contracts that hold communities together are tested past their design limits. The nations that emerge intact from this period share a specific profile. They are the ones who maintained food production throughout the conflict. They are the ones whose populations remained socially cohesive, trusting enough of each other and of their institutions to cooperate in reconstruction. They are the ones whose energy infrastructure remained functional, providing the basic conditions for economic activity to resume. They are, in almost every historical case, the nations that were geographically insulated, politically neutral, internally resilient, and that had made decisions before the crisis arrived, not during it. The closing that will stay with you. Here is the thought that is worth sitting with. Every person who has ever been caught in a war, every civilian who watched their city become a front line, every family that arrived at a border with nothing was, at some point before it happened, living a normal life, going to work, making plans, watching the news with a sense of comfortable distance. They were not naive people. They were not uninformed people. They were people who believed with the same quiet confidence that most of us carry today that the worst would not actually arrive, that the situation would de-escalate, that the adults in the room would find a solution, that history's most catastrophic chapters were things that happened to other people, in other times, in places that were somehow fundamentally different from wherever they were standing. History does not support that confidence. This documentary is not an invitation to panic. It is not a prediction. It is not a political statement about who is right or wrong in the tensions currently pulling the world apart. It is a single, clear-eyed observation. The people who fare best in history's worst moments are not the strongest, or the wealthiest, or the best armed. They are the ones who took the question seriously before the morning, and it became urgent. Where do you want to be?